Hello, I hope you guys had a great weekend and a great week. I am sitting here in the comfort of my echoey office today. The weather's been absolutely wonderful. This weekend, I drove up to Salt Lake to uh, moderate for a discussion between Muslims and uh, Jews on the conversation of compassion. It was really an interesting discussion. I was very concerned because there's a lot of tension about recent events in the news. And it was amazing to me because everybody got along so, so beautifully well. And I want today, this week, we are going to be talking about art movements a little bit. I've talked about this a little bit before, but I want to touch on it again. And we are going to be specifically talking about abstraction. And I have a couple things that I want to share because this can be something that is very difficult for many people to accept. It becomes hard to see, and I think a big reason for it is because we need context to understand things, and sometimes abstraction, when it's presented just for what it is, it's difficult for us to understand what it is because we don't have any context. So this is this week's module, module 12, titled, since we're talking about abstraction, the title is very convenient. It's also called Abstraction. And abstraction was an art movement in a kind of a modern age of art, a modern period of art. And one thing I wanted to do was see if I could share this video with you. If it gets, you guys will have to let me know if it is edited out of our recording. Tell me, and I will send you the link. So I want to share this with you. It is somebody talking very briefly about the difference between art periods and movements. If you'll remember, art periods, a lot of the times art periods and art movements are phrases that people use interchangeably, but they are not the same thing. And we also, since the definition is a little bit difficult to very clearly quantify, there is a little bit of flexibility. So I'm going to, when we talk about this, I want you to understand that it's not meant to be wishy-washy, but it's meant to be open a little bit so that we can have a conversation about it, and the definitions are a little bit flexible. For the most part, art periods are going to be groupings of similar styles of art done within a big window of time, also done within a specific culture. Like ancient art would be an art period. Prehistoric art would be an art period. Egyptian art, these kinds of things. It is when the artist is creating as a function of their belonging to a culture. So they are creating things that belong very firmly within the accepted culture, or the culture in which they're living. In art movement, by contrast, instead of a long time, art movements generally are very much shorter. Different than an art period taking place in one culture, art movements might take place in a couple different countries. And instead of an art period being a function of the culture, art movements are done by artists who are responding to the culture. So we're going to watch this video, and it's just a couple minutes long. And this individual talks about that a little bit.
Art history is divided into periods and movements. The difference between the two is time and intent. Art periods are based on historical eras, and unlike art movements, they aren't consciously formed by artists. Art historians group their art together because they're made during the same time in the same geographical location, so they share a lot of similarities in their cultures, religions, and taste in art subjects. For example, medieval art is made during the medieval time, so right after the fall of Rome and right before the Renaissance. Pretty straightforward, right? So there's the prehistorical period, Mesopotamian period, Egyptian period, Byzantine period, Renaissance period, Baroque period, and that's just a few of them. An art movement is formed by a group of artists, usually with a set goal, and they can have an associated art style or a shared ideology. They usually have meetings, manifestos, and publications that clearly state their goals, basically what they think art should be. Some art movements include realism, impressionism, expressionism, Cubism, Surrealism, and pop art. The line between periods and movements isn't always clear, but while periods were designated after the fact, movements were formed by artists. They may have not called themselves that, like the Mannerists didn't call themselves Mannerists, but they had a same set of goal and ideology that they aspired to, that set them apart from any church or state's regulation of what good art is. Art made today is
All right, I think that's all that I want to share of that video. I hope, again, if you guys don't get the sound off that or wasn't clear, email me right away and I will put that video into the attendance box so you can watch it. The reason why that's important is the reason why it's important to understand the difference between art periods and art movements is because we are talking about art movements now. And then we're also going to be talking about things that are art movements within movements. So if we want to talk about modern art, that the geographical location of modern art is most of the Western world. And then it expanded to the entire world. And modern art generally is going to encompass the time period between about the mid 19th century, most likely actually a little bit more recent. So modern art, probably 1910, 1920. I think that's when that will start. And modern art moves forward until probably about the 90s. And then it switched that, and that is an art period because it covers everything that people were doing within world culture between about 1910 and 1990s. Now we are in a contemporary art period. There aren't really specific indicators of what people are thinking or trying to do. This just kind of describes loose understanding or appreciation of what time period the art period is taking place in. Now, why is that important? Well, it's really probably not, outside of the fact that the things that we've been looking at, Dada, Cubism, Surrealism, and now Abstraction, they are all art movements within the art period of modern art. Okay, I hope that kind of makes sense. So the only thing that really connects the artists that are modern artists is that they are producing art between 1910 and 1990s. With Abstraction, the artists that considered themselves abstract artists, they made abstract art, and a lot of them talked to each other. The Surrealists talked to each other. The Dada artists, they not only talked to each other, but they had magazines and they would have meetings where they would talk about why they were Dada artists. Picasso, when he and Braque formed the Cubist movement, they had magazines that they published. They had manifestos. They explained what they were doing with their art movement. And that's what the difference is. So hopefully that's not entirely confusing, other than I want you to understand Abstraction is within the art period of modern art, but abstraction itself is a movement, a specific movement, as well as an explanation or a description of what you see. And we'll get into that in just a moment. Now, the image here that we see is an example of abstract art. And we'll explain what makes it abstract in just a few minutes. But I want you to understand something else. If an art movement is made by artists that meet together and write about what they're doing, there's a good chance that you could find a beginning date and an end date. If an art period lasts for, say, for example, thousands of years, like the art period of prehistoric art or Egyptian art or Roman art, that's going to be, it's going to be really difficult to apply dates to that because people really don't know the dates. But an art movement, compared to hundreds or thousands of years, an art movement may only last 5, 10, or 20 years. And if it is made up by a band of artists that are reacting to society, they're responding to society, and they have their own agenda, many times art historians can date the art movement to when their first meeting was or their first publication was. But this isn't always the case. So when we talk, I really don't want you to stress too much about the dates of art movements, because the dates aren't really as important as whether you understand what the artists are trying to do, who label, the artists who label themselves as participating in specific movements. So think about that. We're going to look at paintings from a Dutch painter named Piet Mondrian. Now, we're going to be talking about a couple of things. The first is we're going to be talking about what abstraction is as a movement, and then I'll talk about what abstraction is as a description. So I hope this doesn't get too confusing. Now, Brian, when he was researching this, he found some interesting things. Brian is the one that put this module together, and most of the modules that you see for this class. It says the common narrative about abstraction as an art movement is that it was founded in 1910 by two different European white men. One is the Dutch painter Piet Mondrian, and this shows some of this is that's so funny. I completely forgot what the name of this art movement is. Impressionism. This is a post-impressionist painting that Piet Mondrian did. And you can see very easily that it's a tree. What makes it post-impressionist is the way that the tree is painted. The stylism and the really interesting colors. Now this is a little bit later as he's working with the tree idea, and he's trying to get rid of the things that are unnecessary to the understanding or appreciation of it as a tree. Looking at the things that are the most intriguing and amazing. So this looks less like a tree than this did. Now he's revisiting, this is the same tree, and he's thinking, how can I change it even more? How can I make it so that it's interesting just as a source of lines and shapes? And you can still kind of see the tree, and there's the trunk, there's some branches. But as he continues, he keeps coming back to the same tree and thinking, what else can I remove? This is when we start getting into the idea of abstraction as a description. Abstraction means changing something so it's simpler. So he's simplifying the tree. Now, if you didn't know this was a tree, it'd be pretty hard to tell, wouldn't it? and then he moves it even farther away. Rather than using any of the curved lines, he tries to simplify it so there are only horizontal and vertical lines, and he tries to deliver some of that same energy using only vertical and horizontal lines. Now, I think that that's really kind of interesting, and we're going to see something else, and then I'm going to go back and do a little bit more of a discussion on what abstraction is. All right. Now, remember when we said that it is believed that abstraction began in 1910 by two white European men. The first one was Pete Mondrian. We saw how his stuff developed. Now, the second one is a Russian whose name was Wassily Kandinsky. He did a lot of very interesting stuff. And one of the things I like about him is he also tried to incorporate music into his painting later on. Pretty amazing. But you can see this is just like Pete Mondrian's tree. You can recognize that there's something of a landscape in there. It looks kind of sloppy. It looks kind of weird, but that's because it's done in the Impressionist style. And we learned about that a couple weeks ago, where it's the Impressionism is to try to give you an idea of what the artist is seeing rather than what the thing actually looks like. And so the artist is showing visual texture and globs and groupings of color. And if you kind of blur your eyes a little bit, unfocus your eyes, then suddenly you can tell exactly what it is. And that's what Impressionism is. But he also started experimenting with outlines and color and just being fascinated about different groups of dotting and how that comes together to kind of make a picture. And again, if you squint your eyes a little bit, you can tell what this image is. And he's moving towards abstracting. He's trying to simplify the image. Now look at this. Can you tell what this is? He's simplifying the image quite a bit more, and he's adding fields of color that you don't normally see in the regular world. This is supposed to be a sky, and you don't really see those colors in skies unless you're right near a volcano. These are trees, this large pink one here, large yellow one there, and you can see the trunk. This is a mountain made out of blue. And then you can also see these are horses with people riding them. And I see right here, I see 3 horses, a cream one and 2 white ones with a pink rider, a yellow rider, and a red rider. And you can see that this is looking very much more abstract than that landscape. Now he starts getting, this is when we start seeing the development of what people understand today as abstraction. It becomes very difficult to tell what it is. Now he is simplifying things, believe it or not. The shapes are much, much simpler, and he's using a lot of different colors. And this is what abstraction looks like. Simpler shapes, simpler forms, lots of different colors that maybe the colors are referencing sounds or feelings rather than what you see in the natural world with your eyes. What is interesting to me is that he took this in a quite a bit different direction than Pete Mondrian. Remember, Pete Mondrian had all those horizontal and vertical lines on a very even field. Wassily Kandinsky makes these shapes into areas that are interesting to him, that he thinks are fascinating, but that we can't tell if there's a correspondence with anything that we could actually see if we stood in the same spot. Where Pete Mondrian simplified things down to horizontal and vertical lines, Wassily Kandinsky simplifies things into globby shapes, essentially. Where Pete Mondrian liked to use white and black and very rare color, Wassily Kandinsky felt that color was needed to express emotion and feeling and engage people. So he would put a lot of extra color into it. Now, the title, Landscape with Factory Chimney, I guess we could kind of see that. Maybe this is the chimney, but it could also be a tree trunk or a telephone pole, or maybe just a line. So he's starting off with something that exists in the real world, but he's simplifying it to the point where it's difficult to recognize it. Now we get to this. This is so abstracted, where the person, believe it or not, he's simplifying what he sees shape-wise, but then he'll take those simple shapes and repeat them over and over again in different colors and do different things and respond to his feelings about the shapes as opposed to drawing anything that's in front of him. And so this becomes complete abstraction. And it looks very different, doesn't it? What is interesting to me is when we look at abstraction, it seems to me that the more information we can get from the artist, the easier it is for us to understand kind of like what's going on. Now, the title of this is Composition 7. So that lets us know that maybe he's not looking at something in the real world, in the physical world. Maybe what he's doing is responding to how he feels listening to music. That would kind of make more sense to me. But what's fascinating to me about this is we don't have any idea what it is. The more abstract it is, the less idea we have what it is, unless we can get the artist to talk about it. And if the artist shares with us what they are thinking about, like with that title, Composition 7, then that helps us to start generating some sort of an interior conversation so that we can get a little bit of understanding about what's going on. Think of it kind of like when a young child is doing a drawing or a painting and you ask them what it is, then most of the time they will start telling you a story about it. And a lot of the time when a young child does that, you can even see the reference points that they're referring to in the story, sometimes in the paintings or drawings that they're doing. And abstraction is kind of the same way. Now, even though abstraction is based on simplification, this is considered one of the most complicated paintings that Wassily Kandinsky ever did. So there's two people, Pete Mondrian and Wassily Kandinsky, inventing abstraction in about 1910 in Europe. Now, here's something that's kind of interesting to me. That's not always true. Hilma af Klint was a painter. She did a lot of very naturalistic, romantic style paintings, but in the 1800s, she started exploring these ideas that Mondrian and Kandinsky are credited with having invented. When she was about 30, she started exploring ideas. Well, this is what she was doing beforehand, okay? Or this is what she was also doing at about the same time. She did these beautiful landscapes that were very approachable, very calming, and incredibly beautiful. She's making this when she is about 40 years old. And you can tell she is an exceptional painter. I want to see if we can blow that up a little bit. Oh, that did not blow it up much at all, did it? Okay, let's see. I'm sorry, I was not able to blow that up. There we go. Here we go. Excuse me. So this is what Hilma was doing that everybody saw. This is how she made her income, painting these absolutely beautiful romantic landscapes. Romanticism was another art movement we're probably not going to be talking about in this class, where artists were painting landscapes and scenes that really celebrated the connection between human beings and nature. and among other things. So really beautiful, very approachable landscape. We can easily tell that these are trees. We can easily tell that these are birds. There's a beautiful field. There's a lake and gorgeous clouds. However, while she was doing that, she had a section of her studio that was separate, that nobody was allowed to see, where she started experimenting with shapes and color that did not fit into the accepted modes of art at the time. None of the accepted art movements, none of the acceptable gallery expectations, none of that. This was all done on her own in secret. And this is several years before Pete Mondrian and Wassily Kandinsky are credited with having invented abstraction. And look, she's doing these really, really interesting things. What do they have to do with the real world? I don't know. Other than she's starting with the real world and she's simplifying elements and then repeating and overlaying other things. Looks to me like this might be a sphinx or a lion sitting right here. Maybe this is a person holding what looks to me like an open pistachio. I don't really know. But these are paintings that she was doing that were hidden from the world, that predate what most art historians felt was the invention of the abstract movement. And I would say that these read very solidly as abstract painters. Nobody knew about them until after she died. You believe all these things were done 120 years ago. They're absolutely amazing. And this is one of the things that I think makes abstraction a little bit difficult to wrap our heads around. There isn't really a set time for this. In this Museum of Modern Art pamphlet for an exhibit about abstraction, they are saying abstraction began in 1910 to 1925. Now, as a movement, perhaps that's true if we define the movement as having started with those two male artists. But if we define abstraction something somewhat differently, where it's a painting that in order to understand sometimes what it is, we need to hear from the artist, or that elements of the painting are so simplified that we really don't understand what's going on without context, then we're actually going to have to go back a lot earlier than 1910 with Hilma von Klimt's work, Hilma af Klimt's work that predated 1910. But also think about, do you remember that one module we did with the prehistoric art? When we look at that, I'm going to find an image here. Okay, this is a cave painting that is thousands of years old. And we can see right here, here's a beautiful profile of a mountain lion. We can tell it's a mountain lion. And this is her cub. But all this stuff that's going on, these direction lines, all this is abstraction. So this whole image, even though there's a naturalistic face right there, the rest of it is abstraction. And this is thousands of years old. So abstraction is something that people have been doing for an awful long time. That doesn't make it an art period, though, because people did it as part of their expression. And when artists actually did it on purpose as a specific style for specific reasons, that started with Hilma af Klimt and Pete Mondrian and Wassily Kandinsky. I hope that kind of makes some sense. So people have always used abstraction. From the time we were little kids, we've been using abstraction. But it's when we're labeling it as an art movement. Oh, I'm sorry about that. I got to the wrong one. There we go. When we're talking about an art movement, it is quite a bit different. Now, when we are talking about art movements, here's a couple really good questions. If abstraction wasn't invented by European men or European women for that matter in 1910, why did the Museum of Modern Art say it was? Were they mistaken? Were they lying? What was going on? I don't think they were mistaken, and I don't think they were lying. What is fascinating to me, the more that I learn about things like history and religious history and art history, any type of history like that, the more I realize the people that are putting the history together, the people that are assembling it or studying it, are studying or assembling it from the vantage point that they live in the culture that has the best or the highest or whatever, the most. And that everything else is understood to be portions or stopping points along a line of progression that leads to whatever the now represents. For example, the history that we learn is all told with reference to different things happening in different parts of the world. We have dates to it, but they're all told in the frame of reference of look at what has happened to get to where we are today. Art is the same way. It's understood as look at all these different things that happened getting to where we are today. And religion is the same. That's how religious history is understood as well. This assumption that whoever is looking back and collecting the history lives in the best or ultimate time, I think that's a perspective that we all share, and we all share it without thinking about it, but I don't think it's entirely appropriate. This is called cultural centrism. The assumption that whatever we do, whatever we have, is not only normal and good, but it's the best. It's the highest, and everything else is trying to lead to it. Why is this not necessarily appropriate? I'll give one example. In Western culture, most of us believe that we are the most advanced, we're the best, we have the best medicine, we have the best this, we have the best that. In 10,000 years from now, the thing that we will leave behind is most likely going to be the cubic miles. Think about that. You know how long a mile is? A cubic mile. We are leaving behind cubic miles of disposable diapers that will never dissolve back into the ground. They're buried in the ground, but they will never dissolve or degrade. That's what our culture, who's the best, is leaving. Other cultures that we may have considered inferior or not as good, going back because they didn't have electric cars, they didn't have cell phones. Maybe 1,000 years ago, one of those cultures was in, say, China or Europe or Central Africa or South America. The fact that they did not have cell phones or flush toilets does not mean that they were not as evolved as they could be. That has nothing to do with it. For them, their culture was the very best and the peak. And I would be willing to bet that when they looked at history, they saw history in the same way, that everything was leading to the culture that they had developed for themselves, that they were living in. But if we look at culture a slightly different way, look at culture, what is the thing about that culture that makes it the most sustainable and the most stable and the most able to procure the health and safety of its citizens? If we start looking at cultures that way, we can look at things very differently. How long has hard culture lasted? Maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years, maybe 200 years. Look at the Byzantines. The Byzantine culture that was in Turkey between the 3rd century and the 14th century lasted for over 1,000 years. We look at indigenous people in Australia. The indigenous people culture, they don't have cell phones. They didn't have cell phones. They didn't have cars. They didn't have a lot of those things that we think are so amazing and important. And their culture has been around for thousands of years. And we can also look at the Byzantines again If our culture today is going to leave cubic miles of disposable diapers, what do you think the Byzantine culture left from about the 3rd century to the 14th century? They left buildings and paintings, beautiful sculptures, wood carvings, mosaics, all this incredibly gorgeous stuff that 1,000 years later is still beautiful. 1,000 years from now, most of the stuff that we think is so valuable and important isn't going to be usable, and a lot of it isn't even going to survive 40 or 50 years. So think about that. It's a different way of viewing cultures. It doesn't make it better or worse necessarily. I want you to understand that. But if we make the assumption that whatever our way is or our perception is the best, that makes it very difficult for us to appreciate what our ancestors went through and the beautiful things that they created. That's just something to think about. Every culture in the history of the world was the best thing for the people that lived within it. That means that whoever lived in those cultures, whether or not they had cell phones or flush toilets, they lived at the peak of civilization for their time. Whoever they were, it was the very best thing for them. And so when we look at different art, different things that we see, different histories from that perspective, we realize that every culture did the very best that they could and made the most beautiful things in the world at that time for them. And because I think it's very important, I think it's very important to look at other cultures like that, because then we can appreciate them with dignity and respect. We're not looking at them as, oh, they just didn't know any better. Well, no, they did. They knew the very most for people alive at their time. And that's really something to think about. Tying it back into abstraction. Remember, look at that cave painting that's over 30,000 years old, and they were doing all the same things as a lot of these abstractionists were doing in the 20th century. Isn't that fascinating? What I would like you to do, and I'm going to share something with you in just a little bit. What I'd like you to do is think about abstraction, think about the exhibition at Museum of Modern Art, and then you're going to write about it. So look at this. Look at the description for this assignment and read it through, and then think about, what does this really mean? I'm going to show you something really quick here. Well, at least I hope I am. If I can find it, give me just a second here. Okay, that is not what I'm sorry. I'm having a little bit of an issue finding what I need. So just a second. Okay, here we go. This is something I put together for a different class I'm teaching, where we're also talking about abstraction and non-objectivism. Non-objectivism is a little bit different. We're not going to worry about that too much in this class. The difference between abstraction and non-objectivism is that abstraction means simplifying. You come up with these weird shapes because you're actually simplifying them from other shapes. Non-objectivism means you start from a place that isn't rooted in the real world. So abstraction, maybe some of those shapes are things that you see in the elements around you. For non-objectivism, this is when people start painting music, or they start painting shapes like triangles and circles, or they just work with straight color. That's what non-objectivism, because they aren't making reference to the real world. And I want to show some images here. Here is a very realistic tree. This is actually a painting. It's called A Tree in the Park of Chi by Alexander Ivanov. It looks like a tree. Very much. I mean, it's easy to identify. Now, if we go to the next step, this is where an artist starts stylizing the tree. And on this, we can still see the elements of the tree. I mean, and the trunk looks very natural. However, look at all these leaves. All the leaves are completely flat. We see them in the exact same direction, all of them. Well, they're pointing different ways, but they are all flat. That is not how trees form in the real world. I don't think anybody's ever come up to a tree and have all the leaves flat and facing you. This is the first step of abstraction, simplification, and stylization. So you see that right there, it's a stylized tree. Here's another example of a stylized tree. This is a Japanese painting. And on this, you can see something very similar, where all the leaves are pretty much the same shape. You see the flat parts of all the leaves. These fruit are all the same. They're, perfect side views of the peaches. The branches are simplified. You don't have a lot of texture on them. The leaves are simplified. They only seem to be 2 or 3 different colors. This person is simplifying and stylizing the shapes of the leaves. We go on a little bit. This is another stylization. This is by an artist named William Morris, who was in Great Britain. Again, you see all the leaves are flat. They're straight flat on, so we can see the vein perfectly in all of them. This is not naturalistic. We can recognize what it is, though, because we've all seen the shape of those leaves. Let's look at the trunk. This feels very flat. The only depth we have is the fact that one leaf is painted in front of another. All right, so you kind of see all these leaves are pretty much the same. Oh, I'm sorry. There we go. Now you can see what I'm saying. And these flowers here are showing 2 perspectives. There's the full-on flower where you see all 5 or 6 petals, and there's the side view flower. So all the side views are the same, and all the full-on views are the same. In the real world, flowers are all over the place. Now look at this one, the Liberty Tree. This is a federal flag that was flown during the Revolutionary War when the U.S. broke away from Great Britain. This is a Navy flag from New Hampshire, New England. The tree, we know it's a tree because we've seen cutouts, we've seen side view cutouts like this of a tree. But if we're being honest about it, that does not look very naturalistic at all, does it? Not like that first drawing that we saw, or that first painting, the tree in Chigi Park. I'm going to pull that image up really quick so we can see it. This looks very naturalistic. The Liberty Tree, this does not. I mean, that is not very naturalistic at all. But we still know it's a tree. This is a tree that has been abstracted to the point where it no longer looks real, but we can still identify it. And you can kind of see how that goes from naturalism to stylization to abstraction. And now we get to something even more abstracted. This is kanji for a tree. Kanji is a written language in Japan. And this symbol means tree or wood. And if we look at this, I'm going to show this to you. Here, this artist explained how that kanji came to be. Remember I said abstract means simple? Then we have that vertical line here, just like the vertical line of the trunk. We have these 2 lines that look like the root ball of the tree. We have this horizontal line that represents those principal branches. So this is a very simple tree drawing. However, because it is so simple. It is very abstracted. But it's so abstracted that we can't even tell what it is unless somebody gives us the context. And this is what abstraction is meaning. Now here's another painting that I really like to share. The reason why this is important is because this painting is even more abstracted. Look at that. This is just fields of green with a little bit of blue in, but it is still an exterior landscape and there are still trees in it. This is called the Green Garden, but I want to see if you can tell where the trees are. You see them? We have one tree right here. We have one tree right here. We have a tree right here. There's also probably a couple back here and over here, but those are the three easiest to see. We know that they're trees because first, it's green. Second, there's a shape like a trunk. And third, because we have a hint in the title, the Green Garden, that it has something to do with things growing. But other than that, this is so abstracted. If we didn't have those clues, we would have no idea what this is. If this was in different colors, we'd have no idea. If we didn't have the title saying this is a green garden, we'd have no idea what it is. And that's what abstraction is. Now here's a painting that I want you to see. Marcel Duchamp painted this. He painted this after Pete Mondrian, after Wassily Kandinsky, and after Hilma Klimt started abstractionism. This is an abstracted figure done in a cubist style. You don't need to remember all this. I just want to show it to you as an example. For cubists, they wanted to make abstract paintings that allowed one person to see multiple views or multiple points of time in the same image. This is called nude descending a staircase. And if you can imagine that this is an abstraction of a human figure, then these triangles here, we can kind of see, since we know this is moving through time, you can almost kind of see the blurs, the motion blurs, where the feet would be going up and down the stairs. And here's the stairs right through here. So this is all the same person. This is one view of the person, another view of the person, another view, another view, another view. But Marcel Duchamp is showing all the views at the same time. So this is how wild and crazy abstraction can get. I hope that helps with understanding what abstraction is, that it's a simplification of the world around us that we see, and then the artist takes a lot of liberties just expressing the different kinds of things that they want to do. For the studio, I want you to try your hand at making an abstract painting. This is going to be an interesting thing, and it's not going to be like the art that you're used to making. All right? You're going to start with a list of emotions, 4 different emotions. And you could even go online. There are there are several things that are emotion dictionaries and emotion lists. And excuse me, this is something that you guys are very familiar with. You have a lot of emotions. When we were babies, we had 2 emotions, satisfied and dissatisfied, and that's it. You're a baby, you're sitting in a dirty diaper, or you're hungry, you feel dissatisfied, and you're going to let everybody know. If your bottom's clean and if you're well fed, you're going to be satisfied, and you're probably going to smile and coo and be all cute and everything. As you get older, you add more and more emotions to your repertoire. Now, all of you have hundreds and hundreds of emotions that you deal with every day. Some are good, some are not so good. Some you want, some you don't. There's emotion of breaking up with somebody who's a total slug and you hated having them in your life. But there's also the emotion of breaking up with somebody that you really wish things would work out with, but it just didn't happen. Those are 2 very different emotion sets. Or maybe you really like your roommate, except for when they're eating the cereal, and that is so disappointing and irritating. That's a subset of emotion. Maybe you really enjoy your classes, but there's classes that you do that even though it's fun to listen to the teacher or be present in the classroom, you hate the homework. That's another set of emotions there. Walking around outside when it's a beautiful day is another set. So we have lots of different emotions. But what I'd like you to do is write down a list of just 4 of those emotions. And here there's examples of 2 different lists. Now, the next step, or step number 2, is to create a word list of all the things to come to mind when thinking about each emotion. I want you to be as specific as you can about this. What can help is if you have a roommate or a family member or a friend that can do this with you, I would suggest brainstorming. Hold up an emotion, loneliness, and say, what are the things that come to mind about loneliness? For me, things that come to mind about loneliness are an open highway that stretches ahead of me and behind me until I can't see anything. Another thing that comes to mind when I think about loneliness is just the quiet in a building when I know I'm the only one there. And sometimes loneliness is sitting on a chair in the middle of a crowded room, but I still feel like nobody's there. So those are all things that come to mind. If you do that for each of the 4 emotions, I want you to make a series of 3 thumbnails for each of the 4 emotions. A thumbnail is a small drawing about 2 inches by 3 inches where you're going to explore the ideas. And the best way to do this is when you sit down to write your thumbnail, look at the emotion that you're thinking about and read your word list of all the things associated with that emotion. And then the first kind of thing that comes into your mind, that's what you're going to try to sketch. And you don't have to sketch it so somebody else sees what's in your mind. The best way to do this is to sketch the lines that feel the best to you, whether or not it looks like the thing that's in your mind. Because again, you are working on making drawings for emotions, and emotions are very difficult to do this for, but that's what you're going to try to do. So you're going to draw 3 thumbnails for each of the 4 emotions. The 3 thumbnails, each thumbnail is going to be about 2 inches by 3 inches. Okay. That means when you do the 3 thumbnails for each of the 4 emotions, you're going to have 12 drawings when you're done, 12 little thumbnails. All right. Now, when you get done with that part, it might be good to get up, walk around for a bit, and then you come back to it. Maybe promise yourself a bit of ice cream when you're all finished. Because the last step to this is for each of those set of 3 thumbnails, you're going to look at them, let them soak in, and then you're going to make one finished colored design for each of the 4 emotions. So each of the 4 emotions you have 3 thumbnails for. You're going to look at the 3 thumbnails, and from that, you're going to use that as inspiration to create either a colored drawing or a colored painting for each of the 4 emotions. All right, so again, you have a list of 4 emotions. Then you're going to have word lists for each of those 4 emotions that tie into the emotion. Then you're going to make 3 thumbnail sketches for each of the 4 emotions for a total of 12 thumbnails. And then you're going to make 1 small painting or drawing with color for each of the 4 emotions for a total of 4 colored design images. Now, you don't have to use markers. You don't have to use paints. You can use other things. Remember the collages that we made a couple weeks ago? You can make collages if you wanted to. It's a really good idea, though, when you do this, to cover up all the background paper. And I would recommend that the size of this would be about the size of your collage, about 5 by 7 for each of those color images. All right. Now, the peer review, I'm not getting that to work, and I don't know how to get it to work. So if I can't get it to work, what I'm thinking for the peer review, I may just replace that and have you put all this on a discussion board, and then you just need to comment on the images of 3 other students. And they need to be positive comments. Then you draw from the tools of artistic critique. All right, so you talk about describing it, how they made it, what it could mean to you, and whether or not you feel it's successful. So if that's the case, if I'd like to hear back. If nobody can find any way to do the peer review thing, and if I can't get it to work in the next day or two, I will erase that and put all this in the discussion board for people to look at. All right. But that's what we're doing. So for this studio assignment, you're coming up with a list of 4 emotions. You're going to come up with a list of associated words for each of those 4 emotions. You're going to draw 3 thumbnails for each of the 4 emotions. So you have a total of 12 thumbnails. And these are little sketches that are about 2 inches by 3 inches. And then the last step is you are going to make a colored design with markers, paints, colored pencils, or even collage for each of those 4 emotions. Referencing, if you want, those thumbnails. Sometimes the thumbnails just help us to get better ideas. All right, so what you're going to do when you turn in this is you're going to have a word list, and the word list is going to look like these are the 4 emotions. Next line down, for the first emotion, these are the words and ideas associated with it. After that, for the second emotion, these are the words and ideas associated with that, and all those. Then you're also going to take a picture of the thumbnails, the 12 thumbnails, and the finished painting for each of these. I would recommend the easiest way for you to submit this is to put all that into one PDF and just attach the PDF for your submission. If you have an easier way to do it, that would be great. And again, the 3 peer reviews, if I can't get that to work by tomorrow, we will turn this into a discussion. All right? If you guys would like me to, let me know right away as soon as you watch this, and tell me if you would like me to put up a couple short videos talking about abstraction a little bit more clearly. And I may do that anyway, just so you guys can get a little bit better idea of what's going on. And again, abstraction itself as a process of simplifying what people saw, that's been around for 30,000 years at least. Abstraction as an art movement with a group of artists that were working in a similar way to express similar ideas, that started right around 1906, 1910, depending on who you talk about, with Pete Mondrian, Wassily Kandinsky, and Hilma af Klint. And that's something that we still do today. All right, if any of you guys have questions, let me know, and I will do my best to answer them as quickly as possible. I'm going to stop sharing. There you go. Now I'm going to think about what people might have as questions. One is, please explain the assignment better. The assignment, again, consists of you write down 4 different emotions. For each of those 4 emotions, you make a list of things that you think of associated with those emotions. Then when you start creating your art, you're going to make 3 thumbnails, and the thumbnails are 2 inches by 3 inches about. And you're going to make 3 thumbnails for each of your 4 emotions for a total of 12 thumbnails. Then when you do all that, you're going to make a color image for each of the 4 emotions. So you have 4 color images that can be colored pencil, colored marker, paint, or pastel, or collage. You can do any of those things. And it will be an image for each of those emotions. Now, so you'll have 4 color images altogether, and you're going to put all of that into a PDF ideally and turn it all in. So all of that is what we need. Now, a couple things to be mindful of. These are not supposed to be realistic images. The emotion paintings or colored drawings that you do should not look like anything in the real world. I'll give an example of this. If your emotion is angry, and it's angry about somebody who left your life and did a kind of jerky job of leaving your life, it was a bad breakup, maybe some of the imagery in your colored image for that feeling, and that feeling could be hurt or it could be anger. Maybe some of the imagery would include a really spiky ball, and maybe the spiky ball is like a blue color that feels kind of lonely, or maybe it's a red color that feels really upset or passionate. Maybe the spiky ball is surrounded by a broken halo, and the halo is just broken rings that you've done. So it can be anything, but you will not be painting somebody leaving a room, for example, because the idea is not to make anything that looks like the outside world, that looks like the world that we can all see. It is simplified shapes, colors, and other lines and lines and forms that help you to express the emotion that you're feeling, as opposed to showing what you see. All right, I hope that makes sense. Again, feel free to ask me any questions. Well, that is what I wanted to get through this week. So we did a pretty good job. We covered everything we had to, and I really appreciate you sticking it out with me. I was asking for feedback. I think what I'm going to do is, when I post this on the attendance portion, I'm just going to include the other two videos that I mentioned that talk about what abstraction is. And you'll get points for watching this video, and then you'll get extra credit points for commenting on each of the other two videos. So you get 3 points for watching this one, and 1 point each for making a comment specifically on each of those other two videos. All right? I hope you guys have a wonderful week and weekend, and I look forward to seeing what you guys come up with for this assignment. Thank you so much for listening to me and following through with making stuff for this class.